In this recording, we will look at the bivariate analysis. Since this is a large section, it is nice to have a couple of sentences before the first subsection, maybe something just to set the scene and refocus the reader, such as, in this section, potential factors that may influence the exam result will be considered. The same structure template can be used for each of the bivariate subsections. For the bivariate analysis, you are also looking to comment on whether a relationship exists between the various factors and the exam results. Where relationships do exist, you want to comment on the strength of the relationship. You will need to include 4 subsections as outlined in the task sheet and in the first workshop recording. 4.1 Impact of gender on exam result. 4.2 Impact of quiz result on exam result. 4.3 Impact of lecture attendance on exam result. And 4.4 Impact of SGT attendance on exam result. Now, of course, they're just outlines of possible headings for those subsections. Feel free to come up with your own. And so for each of the subsections, we will still need to follow the report writing conventions. And so a good template is intro sentence, chart or table, features, interpretation and analysis, and a final concluding sentence. Since we have already spent a fair bit of time talking about how to write sections in the previous workshops, for this workshop we are going to think more about Excel, but remember, in this part of the report we are trying to see what factors, if any, influence exam results achieved. So moving on to Excel, for the impact of gender on exam results, the first thing to think about is what kind of variables we have. The exam result is numerical and gender is categorical. For this mixed bivariate combination, we can use both the rows and columns of a pivot table, making sure that the exam results are in groups. This can then be turned into either a clustered, stacked or 100% stacked bar chart. You can try these options to see which you think shows the relationship, if any, between these variables, and therefore specifically whether there is a relationship between gender and exam result. Of course, as the chart you will create in doing this will have a lot of information within it, it is also useful to actually begin this subsection with something more basic to help us see if there are any differences between the genders. We have a whole lot of exam results, we have analysed them overall, but thinking about gender, we can look at using some of our basic numerical measures, but just on exam results for a specific gender at the one time. For example, we can see whether the average exam result for males is the same or different to the average exam result for females. While we could just sort the whole data set so that the exam results for different genders are grouped together, and then just use the individual average formulas on the groups, we can do this analysis more quickly by creating a pivot table. Put gender into the rows area and exam result into the values area, and then change the field settings so that you calculate an average rather than a count. You may also want to look at the standard deviation for each gender and can add an extra column to the pivot table to include the standard deviation here as well. The idea is that you could use these averages from each gender to see any initial difference, and then if necessary expand on this by looking at the more full distribution chart created earlier. You should discuss the trends and your conclusion. You would then go through a similar process for subsection 4.2. So if we have a look at quiz result and exam result as another example, in this case, so for subsection 4.2, we have 2 numerical variables, and so we should be using a scatter plot to visualize. Also, have a think about what measure is useful for this kind of bivariate data. Think about what trend you see, describe it, and also discuss whether it is expected or not and why. So you should be looking at trends and including a conclusion for this subsection. So you work through the remaining bivariate relationships in a similar way. I would also suggest that you think about which factors overall have the most influence, and that you look to see whether there is any way you can go further with analysing the more important factors. Don't forget that for your report you will need an overall conclusion section, as we discussed in the first help session. But other than that, all the best with working on your report.